Amid all the political noise, there's one question that seems to pop up again and again. What can a president actually do to interfere with an election run by the states? It's a huge question, one that really gets to the heart of how American democracy is supposed to work. And today, we're going to break down the constitutional realities of it all.
So here's how we'll tackle this. First, we're going to look at the what-if scenarios that are keeping election officials up at night. Then we'll dive into two big threats, messing with the vote itself and then messing with the count. But for each threat, we're also going to look at the reality, the legal guardrails designed to stop them. And finally, we'll get to the big one. Even if the system holds, what's the real, long-term danger to our elections?
Now, this isn't just some academic exercise. Right now, as we speak, election officials all over the country are basically wargaming the absolute worst-case scenarios. They're not treating potential disruption as a long shot anymore, but as something they have to be ready for.
And this quote from Representative Joe Morale just perfectly sums up the new reality. You know, the old way of thinking that certain things just can't happen here, that's gone. Now it's all about running through every single wild scenario you can think of, just to make sure there's a plan in place. And we're not talking about small stuff. The scenarios they're planning for are massive. I mean, imagine a president ordering federal agents to polling stations, or trying to invalidate all mail-in ballots with the stroke of a pen, or even seizing ballot boxes. These are the kinds of extreme possibilities that officials now feel they have to treat as serious threats. Okay, so let's dig into that first major threat. This is what you might call front-end interference. Basically, any attempt to get in the way of the actual physical act of people casting their ballots. This quote makes that abstract idea feel incredibly real and, frankly, pretty chilling. The strategy behind a statement like this is pretty clear. Use the power and image of federal law enforcement to create an environment of fear. It's a tactic that's aimed directly at voter intimidation. And here's the key part of that strategy. The goal isn't to stop everyone from voting. It's much more surgical than that. It's about creating targeted fear in very specific swing districts to try and depress turnout among certain communities. And look, in a really close election, that could be all it takes to change an outcome. So that's the threat. It sounds pretty serious. But what's the reality? What do our laws and the Constitution actually have to say about this? Well, it turns out there are some really powerful legal firewalls built to prevent exactly this kind of thing from happening.
The first line of defense is about as clear as it gets. It's baked right into federal law. There's really no gray area here. Sending federal troops or any other armed agents to police the polls is explicitly forbidden. This is not a new idea, by the way. It's a bedrock principle of American elections.
And it's not just about the law itself, it's also about logistics. As former DOJ lawyer David Becker points out here, there are two massive hurdles. First, the courts would almost certainly step in and shut it down immediately. And second, just on a practical level, think about it. The federal government just doesn't have the manpower to police over 100,000 polling places across the country. It's not feasible. This slide really gets to the very heart of the whole issue. You might hear claims that states are basically just agents of the federal government, but the constitutional reality is the complete opposite. The Constitution gives the president precisely zero role in running elections. That power belongs to the states, period. Okay, so let's say the voting itself goes smoothly. What happens next? Let's shift our focus to the back-end threats, the attempts to interfere with counting the ballots and certifying the winner. Now, this right here is a true nightmare scenario for officials, and it's because of one simple phrase, chain of custody. That's the secure, unbroken record of who has handled the ballots. The second that chain is broken, you can't prove the votes haven't been tampered with, and an entire election could be thrown into complete chaos. So how in the world do you fight back against a threat that serious? Well, once again, the defense is built on the law. State and local officials have some pretty powerful legal tools ready to go, from having court filings prepared in advance to getting judges to compel officials to act. Officials aren't planning on being caught off guard. In fact, many are being advised to get their legal challenges ready right now, to have them pre-drafted and ready to file the instant a seizure is even attempted. The whole game here is speed, moving at lightning pace to protect the integrity of the ballots. Now, here's a key legal tool you might hear about, a writ of mandamus. It sounds complicated, I know, but the idea is actually very simple. It's a court order that tells a public official you have a job to do and you need to do it. In this context, it would be a court forcing a reluctant official to certify the election results.
And that's because courts have said time and time again that certifying an election isn't a political choice. It's what's called a ministerial duty. It's just a basic administrative part of the job. Officials don't get to decide if they like the results, they just have to certify them. And refusing to do so isn't just a protest, it's a potential felony.
So it really seems like the legal and constitutional guardrails are pretty strong. But does that mean there's no real threat? Well, the argument is that the danger might be something a little more subtle and maybe a lot more corrosive. Just think about this for a second. After the 2020 election, there were 62 different lawsuits filed to challenge the results. 61 of them failed. I mean, that one statistic alone says so much about how resilient our judicial guardrails can be when they're really put to the test. And that really raises a critical question. If the goal wasn't to actually win in court, then what was it? The argument is that the real objective and the real success of these efforts was something else entirely: to plant seeds of doubt, to delegitimize valid results, and maybe, most importantly, to wear away at public trust in the entire democratic system. And that erosion of trust isn't just a theory. You can see it in the data. Look at this poll from YouGov and The Economist. The percentage of Americans who said they were confident in a fair election absolutely plummeted, from 44% down to just 25%. That's a staggering collapse of faith. And that leaves us with the final, and maybe the most critical question of all. The legal firewalls, the constitutional guardrails, they might hold strong. The courts may do their job. But what happens to a democracy when a huge chunk of the population just stops trusting the results of an election? That might be the question that matters most.